I thought peace was all I needed after my wife passed. Just me, some trees, and silence. But my son-in-law had other plans. Plans that didn't include asking permission. Plans that made me realize some people mistake kindness for weakness. And let me tell you something. That's a mistake you only get to make once with me. Before I tell you how that went down, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe how this story ends. My name's Frank, and I'm 63 years old. I lost my Barbara 2 years ago this November to cancer. 51 years we were married. 51 years of waking up to the same face, the same laugh, the same woman who knew exactly how I took my coffee and never once complained about my habit of leaving cabinet doors open. When she died, something in me died too. The house we'd raised our daughter in felt like a museum. Every room echoed with memories I wasn't ready to live with every single day. So I sold it. Took that money and bought myself a little piece of heaven, about 2 hours north. A house in the woods. Nothing fancy, mind you. Just a 3-bedroom cabin-style place with a wraparound porch, surrounded by pine trees, and the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts. Took me 8 months to find it, another 4 to fix it up the way I want it. I did most of the work myself. Gave me something to do with my hands, something to focus on besides the empty space Barbara left behind. My daughter, Sarah, came up to visit when I first moved in. She brought her husband, Derek, and my 2 grandkids, Emma and little Frankie, named after me, which still makes my chest tight when I think about it. Sarah seemed happy for me. She walked around the property, admiring the deck I'd rebuilt, the way the morning light came through the kitchen windows. She hugged me tight before they left and said, "Dad, you deserve this. You deserve some peace." Derek? Derek said all the right things too. Shook my hand firm, told me the place looked great, said something about how he wished he had the skills to build something like this. But there was something in his eyes, something I didn't catch at the time, something that should have been a warning. See, Derek's the kind of guy who wears his ambition on his sleeve, but keeps his character hidden in his pocket. He's got a good job in sales, makes decent money, drives a nice car, dresses sharp, but there's this thing about him that's always rubbed me the wrong way. It's subtle. The way he talks over Sarah sometimes. The way he handles money like it's a game he's winning and everyone else is losing. The way he smiles when he's asking for something, like he already knows you're going to say yes. Barbara never liked him. She told me that once, late at night after their wedding. We were lying in bed and she just said it out loud. "I don't trust that man, Frank. There's something off." I defended him back then. Told her she was being overprotective, that Sarah was a grown woman and could make her own choices. Barbara just looked at me with those knowing eyes of hers and said, "I hope I'm wrong." She wasn't. It started small. About 6 weeks after I'd fully moved in and settled. Derek called me on a Tuesday evening. I remember, because I was sitting on the porch watching the sun go down through the trees, nursing a glass of whiskey and feeling something close to contentment for the first time in months. "Hey, Derek, got a minute?" His voice had that casual tone, too casual. "Sure, Derek, what's up?" "So, listen, I was talking to Sarah about your place, and man, you've really got something special up there. 3 bedrooms, right?" "Yep, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. It's just right for me." "That's what I thought." There was a pause. "You know, I was thinking, my folks are getting older. My dad's got some mobility issues, and my mom's been stressed trying to take care of them in their apartment. They've been talking about needing a change, somewhere quieter, easier to manage." I already knew where this was going. I could feel it in my gut. "That's tough," I said carefully. "Getting older's no joke." "Yeah, exactly. So here's what I was thinking, and hear me out, okay? What if they moved in with you, just temporarily? You've got the space, it's all one level, the area's peaceful, it'd be perfect for them, and honestly, it would give Sarah and me some breathing room. They've been hinting about moving closer to us, and if they're with you, they're still in the family, you know? I sat there in the quiet, the whiskey glass sweating in my hand, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Derek, this is my home. I just built this life for myself. I'm not really looking for roommates. Come on, Frank, they're family. And it's not forever, just until we figure something else out. 6 months, maybe a year tops. They wouldn't be a burden. They'd probably barely see you. And think about it. You'd have people around, company. You've been alone up there for months now. This could be good for you, too. That's when I heard it, that edge in his voice, the one that said he'd already made up his mind and was just waiting for me to agree, like my answer was a formality. I'll have to think about it, I said. Sure. Take your time. But even as he said it, I could tell he didn't really mean it. Just let me know soon, okay? They're really struggling right now. We hung up. I sat there on that porch for another hour, watching the sky turn orange to purple to black. The whiskey didn't taste good anymore. 2 days later, Sarah called, my daughter. My little girl who used to climb into my lap when she had nightmares, who used to hold my hand crossing the street even when she was way too old for it. Dad, Derek told me he talked to you about his parents. Yeah, he mentioned it. I think it's a really good idea. They really are struggling and you have the room. It would just be for a little while, and honestly, it would make me feel better knowing you're not alone up there. That last part stung. Because it wasn't about me. It was about Derek, about what Derek wanted. And Sarah was doing what she'd been doing for the last 8 years of marriage, back in his place.
Honey, I love you, but this is my home. I moved out here to have some space to heal, to figure out life without your mom. Having 2 people I barely know living under my roof isn't what I need right now. Dad, please. Derek's really worried about them, and they're getting older. They need help. Then Derek can help them. He's their son. Silence. Long enough that I thought maybe she'd hung up. Then, quietly, he said you'd say that. And there it was, the script Derek had written for her. The narrative he'd built where I was the selfish old man who wouldn't help family when they needed it. We didn't argue. We just ended the call with awkward goodbyes and unspoken tension hanging between us like smoke. But after that conversation, something shifted. Sarah started calling less. When she did call, the conversations were short, surface level. The grandkids still got on the phone and told me about school and soccer practice, but I could feel the distance growing. Derek's distance, really. But it felt like I was losing my daughter all over again, and that hurt worse than anything. Then came the visit. 3 weeks after that phone call, Sarah told me they were driving up for the weekend, all 4 of them. She said the kids wanted to see Grandpa, wanted to run around in the woods, maybe go fishing at the creek nearby. I said yes, because I missed them, because I wanted to believe things could still be normal. They showed up late Friday afternoon. Emma and Frankie exploded out of the car like they always did, all energy and noise and hugs. I squeezed them tight, smelled their kid smell, a mix of shampoo and grass and something sweet. Sarah hugged me too, but it was brief, polite. Derek shook my hand and clapped my shoulder like we were buddies. That first evening was fine. We grilled burgers on the deck. The kids ran around chasing fireflies as the sun set. Sarah and I talked about her work, about Emma's upcoming birthday party. Derek was on his phone most of the time, typing away, barely present. Nothing unusual. But that morning, everything changed. I woke up early, like always, made coffee, and walked out to the porch. And that's when I saw Derek standing in the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, pacing back and forth.
I could hear pieces of his conversation through the screen door. "Yeah, I'm telling you, it's perfect. 3 bedrooms, barely uses 2 of them. He'll come around, don't worry. I know how to handle him." My blood went cold. He didn't see me standing there, didn't know I could hear him. He kept talking, kept pacing, kept planning out my life like it was his to arrange. And that's when it hit me. This whole visit wasn't about the kids. It wasn't about mending fences or family bonding. This was reconnaissance. Derek was measuring my house like it was real estate he intended to flip. When he finally came inside, I was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, face neutral. "Morning, Frank. Coffee smells good." "Help yourself." He poured a cup, sat down across from me, and smiled. That smile, the one that said he thought he was smarter than me, that he could play me. "Listen, I've been thinking more about my folks' situation. I really think if you just met them, spent some time with them, you'd see they're no trouble at all. What if we drove them up here next weekend, just for a day visit? No pressure, just so you can see what I mean." I took a long sip of coffee, let the silence stretch out, watched him squirm just a little. "Derek, I already told you, this isn't what I want." "I get that, but—" "No." My voice was calm, steady. "You don't get it. Because if you got it, we wouldn't keep having this conversation. This is my home. I worked my whole life for this peace, and I'm not giving it up." His smile faded. Just for a second, I saw something flicker across his face. Something ugly. Something that confirmed every instinct I had about this man. "You know, family's supposed to help each other out. I thought you understood that." "I do understand that. But you are not asking for help. You're asking me to give up my life so you don't have to deal with yours." He stood up, set his coffee cup down hard enough that it made a crack against the table. "Sarah was right. You are being selfish." And there it was, out in the open, the poison he'd been dripping into my daughter's ear. The rest of that weekend was ice, cold and hard and fragile. Sarah barely spoke to me. The kids sensed the tension and got quiet. They left Sunday morning earlier than planned. Emma hugged me goodbye, and I held her longer than usual, wondering when I'd see her again, wondering what stories Derek was already spinning in the car on the way home. After they left, I stood in my driveway for a long time. The woods were quiet around me. The house felt emptier than it ever had. And I realized something important, something that settled into my bones and stayed there. Derek wasn't going to let this go. He'd found what he wanted, and men like him don't stop until they get it or until they're stopped. He was going to keep pushing, keep manipulating, keep using my daughter and my grandkids as leverage. And if I didn't do something, he'd find a way to take this from me, or make my life miserable trying. So, I made a decision. A decision that would have made Barbara shake her head and laugh that knowing laugh of hers. The kind that said, "I married a stubborn man, but he's my stubborn man." If Derek wanted a surprise, I'd give him one. But it wouldn't be the surprise he was expecting. It was time to remind him that just because I'm old doesn't mean I'm harmless. And just because I've been quiet doesn't mean I've been sleeping. I walked back into my house, poured myself another cup of coffee, and started making plans. The first thing I did was call Derek back. Caught him off guard, I think. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 days after that disaster of a weekend visit.
I let the phone ring 4 times before he picked up, probably wondering if he should even answer. "Frank?" He sounded cautious, surprised. "Hey, Derek, listen, I've been doing some thinking." I kept my voice tired, worn down, like a man who'd finally been beaten into submission. "About your parents." Silence on his end. I could practically hear the gears turning. "Yeah? Maybe you're right. Maybe I have been selfish. Barbara always said I could be stubborn as a mule, and maybe this is one of those times." I paused, let out a long breath. "If your folks really need a place, and it's just temporary, like you said, then I guess I can make it work." The change in his voice was immediate, like flipping a switch. "Frank, seriously, man, that's great. That's really great. I knew you'd come around. I told Sarah you just needed some time to think about it." "I'll bet you did. I'll bet you told her all kinds of things." "Yeah, well, I'm getting older too. Maybe having some people around wouldn't be the worst thing." Each word tasted like ash in my mouth, but I kept my tone even, resigned. "When were you thinking they'd move in?" "How about 2 weeks? That gives us time to get their stuff together, and you time to prepare the space. They don't need much, really. Just a bedroom and access to the bathroom. They're pretty low maintenance." Low maintenance, right. Like this whole thing had ever been about his parents' comfort and not about Derek getting what he wanted. "2 weeks works. Let me know what day and I'll make sure everything's ready." "Will do, Frank. And hey, I really appreciate this. I know it wasn't an easy decision." No, it wasn't. We hung up. I sat there in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, and felt something settle into place. A calmness. A kind of calm that comes when you stop reacting and start planning. When you stop being the victim and start being the architect. See, here's what Derek didn't understand about me. What people like him never understand about guys like me. I grew up in a different time. A time when you learned to solve your own problems because nobody was coming to solve them for you. I worked construction for 40 years, started as a laborer, ended up running my own crew. You don't do that without learning a thing or two about people, about leverage, about knowing when to push and when to pull, about understanding that the loudest guy in the room is usually not the smartest one. Derek thought he'd won, thought he'd outmaneuvered the old man, and that was exactly what I needed him to think. I spent the next few days doing research, made some calls to people I knew. An old buddy of mine, Tommy, works in property management. We had lunch at a diner halfway between our places, and I asked him some hypothetical questions about tenant rights, about what happens when people establish residency in someone's home, about how hard it is to get people out once they're in. Tommy raised an eyebrow at me over his coffee, gave me this look like he knew I was up to something, but he answered my questions straight. Told me things I suspected but needed confirmed. Then I called my lawyer, a guy named Richard Chen, who handled Barbara's estate and the sale of our old house. Set up a meeting for the following Monday. Told him I needed to discuss some legal protections for my property. Richard's a sharp guy, doesn't ask unnecessary questions, just listens and gives you options. We talked for 2 hours. By the time I left his office, I had paperwork drawn up. The kind of paperwork that would make things very clear
and very legal. But that was just the foundation.
I started with the spare bedrooms, the two I'd been using for storage and the occasional guest. One of them was going to be for Derek's parents, so I needed to make it look like I was making a genuine effort. I cleaned it out, moved boxes to the garage, put fresh sheets on the bed, found an old dresser in the basement and dragged it upstairs. Made it look lived in and ready. Welcoming, even. But the other bedroom, that's where things got interesting. I'd been using it as a workshop. Had a desk in there, some tools, Barbara's old sewing machine that I couldn't bring myself to get rid of. I left most of that stuff exactly where it was. But I added something new. A small camera system, the kind you can monitor from your phone. Nothing illegal, mind you. It was my house, and I had every right to know what was happening in my own space. I mounted 2 cameras, one in that bedroom and one in the hallway, angled so they covered the main living areas, disguised them as smoke detectors. Nobody ever looks twice at a smoke detector. My neighbor, Jim, stopped by while I was working on the wiring. He's a retired electrician, lives about a quarter-mile down the road. Only person I see regularly out here. "What you working on, Frank?" "Just updating some safety equipment. Getting older, you know. Want to make sure I've got things covered." Jim nodded, didn't push it. That's the thing about living out here. People respect your business. "Well, if you need any help with the electrical, you let me know." "Appreciate it, Jim." He left, and I went back to work. Got the cameras set up, tested them on my phone. Crystal clear video, audio too. Whatever happened in this house from here on out, I'd have a record of it. Next came the paperwork. Richard had drawn up what's called a cohabitation agreement, basically a contract that outlined the exact terms of Derek's parents staying in my home, how long they could stay, what areas of the house they had access to, what financial responsibilities they had, and most importantly, a clause that stated they were guests, not tenants, and that they could be asked to leave at any time with 72 hours' notice. No establishment of residency, no legal right to stay. The genius of it was in how I was going to present it, not as a gotcha, not as a power move, but as a reasonable precaution that any responsible homeowner would take. Just protecting everyone involved, making sure we're all on the same page. What kind of person would refuse to sign something so sensible? I also made copies, multiple copies. One for me, one for Richard, one in my safe deposit box at the bank. Because guys like Derek have a way of losing paperwork that doesn't work in their favor. Sarah called me that Wednesday. Her voice was warmer than it had been. Derek must have told me I'd agreed. "Dad, Derek said you're willing to let his parents stay with you. That's really generous." Generous. That's one word for it. "Yeah, well, you were right. They're family, and I do have the space. It really will just be temporary, I promise. Once they get settled and figure things out, they'll find their own place." She actually believed that. I could hear it in her voice. She thought this was all on the level, that her husband was genuinely worried about his aging parents and not just looking for free housing to get them off his back. Part of me wanted to tell her right then, to warn her, but I knew she wouldn't hear it, not yet. Some lessons you have to learn yourself. "How are the kids?" I asked, changing the subject. "They're good. They miss you. Emma keeps asking when she can come back and go fishing." "Anytime, sweetheart. Door's always open for 'em." For them. Not for Derek. Not anymore. We talked a bit more, and before we hung up, she said something that made my chest tight. "I love you, Dad, and I'm proud of you for doing this. Mom would be proud too." I had to clear my throat before I could answer.
Love you too, baby girl. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. Because that was the thing Derek didn't understand. This wasn't just about him trying to take advantage of me. It was about him putting me in a position where I had to choose between my peace and my relationship with my daughter, where either choice made me lose. And that kind of manipulation, that kind of casual cruelty wrapped up in family obligation, that's what made this personal. Barbara wouldn't have been proud of me agreeing to this, but she would have understood what I was about to do. She always understood me better than I understood myself.
The 2 weeks went by faster than I expected. I kept busy, prepared the house, made a few more calls, had one more meeting with Richard to go over everything, practiced what I was going to say, how I was going to say it, the tone, the timing, the execution. Derek called a few times with updates. His parents were excited, they were packing, they were grateful. He asked if I needed them to bring anything, and I said no, just themselves. Kept it friendly, kept it light, gave him absolutely no reason to suspect that anything had changed except my mind. 3 days before they were supposed to arrive, I did one final thing. I wrote a letter, put it in an envelope, sealed it, and gave it to Jim next door. Told him if anything happened to me, anything at all, he should open it and contact Richard Chen. Jim gave me a long look, asked if everything was okay. I told him everything was fine, just being cautious. He took the letter, said he'd keep it somewhere safe. Then came the day, Saturday morning. Arrival time was set for 11 a.m. I woke up early, made coffee, sat on the porch watching the sun come up through the trees. The air was cool and crisp, that early autumn feeling that always reminded me of starting over, of new beginnings. Ironic, considering what was about to go down. I wasn't nervous. That surprised me a little. I thought maybe I would be. Thought maybe I'd second-guessed myself, wonder if I was taking this too far. But sitting there in the quiet with my coffee, I just felt clear, certain, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. At 10:30, I heard the sound of tires on gravel. They were early. Of course they were. Derek probably wanted to get them settled before lunch, get it all done quick and efficient, like checking a box on his to-do list. I stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, and watched as not one but 2 vehicles came up the driveway. Derek's SUV in front, followed by a U-Haul truck. A U-Haul. For a temporary stay? For guests who supposedly didn't need much? Man, I wasn't born yesterday. They parked, and Derek got out first, that big smile on his face. Sarah was in the passenger seat, and the kids were in the back. Behind them, an older couple emerged from the U-Haul. Derek's parents. I'd met them maybe twice before, years ago, at the wedding and once at a holiday dinner. The dad, Ron, was thick-built with gray hair and a slight limp. The mom, Patricia, was small and bird-like, nervous eyes darting around like she was expecting trouble. "Frank!" Derek called, walking toward me with his hand extended. "Right on time. Well, little early, but you know how it is." I shook his hand, firm grip, eye contact, playing the part. "Welcome," I said. Looked past him to his parents. "Ron, Patricia, good to see you again." They smiled, nodded, murmured their thanks. They looked tired. Maybe they really did need a change. Maybe in another version of this story, where Derek had asked properly and respected my boundaries, this could have worked out fine. But that wasn't this story. Emma and Frankie ran up to me, and I scooped them both into hugs. Those kids had nothing to do with this. Whatever happened here, I'd make sure they understood that. Sarah hugged me too. "Thanks again, Dad. This means a lot." I nodded. Didn't trust myself to say much.
Derek started directing the unloading. Boxes and furniture came out of that U-Haul like water from a burst pipe. A recliner, a TV, suitcases, storage containers, more stuff than any temporary guest would ever need. Ron and Patricia just stood there looking uncomfortable, while Derek orchestrated everything like he owned the place. I watched, said nothing, let him play out his hand. It took about an hour to get everything inside. The guest bedroom was packed, boxes lined the hallway, their recliner ended up in my living room, their TV on my wall. Derek was making decisions about my space like it was his to make, and I just stood there, arms crossed, watching every move, memorizing every overstep, feeding that calm, cold certainty growing in my chest. Finally, when everything was unloaded and everyone was gathered in the living room catching their breath, I walked to my office, came back with a folder, the folder, set it down on the coffee table. Before we go any further, there's just some paperwork we need to take care of. Derek looked at the folder, then at me. Paperwork. Standard stuff. Cohabitation agreement. Just protects everyone involved. Make sure we're all clear on expectations. The room went quiet. Sarah looked confused. Ron and Patricia exchanged glances. Derek's smile faltered for just a second before he recovered. "Frank, I don't think that's really necessary. We're family." "I know we are. That's why we're going to do this right." I pulled out the documents, slid them across the table, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw something flicker in Derek's eyes. Something that told me he was starting to realize this wasn't going to go the way he'd planned. I sat down in my chair, the one Barbara used to tease me about because it was worn and old, and I refused to replace it. Folded my hands, looked at each of them, my daughter, my son-in-law, his parents, my grandkids playing in the corner, oblivious. And I thought about Barbara, about what she would say if she were here. Probably something like, "Give 'em hell, Frank, but do it with style." So that's exactly what I was about to do. Derek picked up the papers, his eyes scanned the first page, and I watched his jaw tighten. He flipped to the second page, then the third. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. Sarah was watching him, confused. Ron and Patricia sat frozen on the couch like they'd walked into something they didn't understand. "This is a legal contract," Derek said slowly, his voice careful, controlled. "You want my parents to sign a legal contract to stay in your home?" "That's right," I said, calm as Sunday morning. "It's a cohabitation agreement. Outlines the terms of their stay, how long they're welcome, what their responsibilities are, what happens if things don't work out. Just standard protection for everyone involved." "Dad, what is this?" Sarah's voice was small, uncertain. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, saw the confusion in her eyes, the way she was glancing between me and her husband, trying to understand what was happening. And I realized she genuinely had no idea what Derek had been planning. She thought this was all innocent, all above board. "Sweetheart, when someone moves into your home, even temporarily, there are legal implications. If they establish residency, it can be very difficult to ask them to leave. This agreement makes it clear that Ron and Patricia are guests, that this is temporary, exactly like Derek said it would be." Derek's face was turning red. Not embarrassed red, angry red. "This is insulting. These are my parents, your family, and you're treating them like strangers who need to be legally bound. I'm treating them like adults who understand that clarity prevents problems down the road," I said evenly. Unless there's something in this agreement you object to, something that doesn't match what you told me this would be." That hit him. I could see it land, because everything in that contract was exactly what he'd promised. Temporary stay, 6 months maximum, no financial claim on the property, 72-hour notice to vacate if needed, guest status only. If this really was just a helpful arrangement between family, like he'd said, there'd be no reason not to sign it. But we both knew that's not what this was. Ron cleared his throat. "Can I see that?" His voice was gruff, but not unkind. Derek hesitated, then handed him the papers. Ron read through them slowly, his wife reading over his shoulder. After a few minutes, Ron looked up at me. "This seems fair, reasonable even. We appreciate you opening your home. Having it in writing actually makes me feel better, makes it official." Patricia nodded. "We don't want to cause any problems, Frank. We just needed somewhere quiet for a while. If this makes you more comfortable, we'll sign it." And there it was. Derek's own parents being more reasonable than he was, understanding what he couldn't or wouldn't. They weren't the enemy here. They never had been. They were just people caught in their son's game. Derek's face went from red to pale. "Dad, Mom, you don't need to sign anything. Frank's just being paranoid." "I don't think he is," Ron said, looking at his son with something I recognized, disappointment. "This is his home, Derek. We're guests here. This paper just makes that clear. What's the problem?" What's the problem? Beautiful question. Because Derek couldn't answer it honestly. Couldn't say the problem was that he had planned to park his parents here indefinitely without my real consent. Couldn't admit that this whole thing had been about manipulation, not help. So instead, he just stood there, the papers clenched in his hand, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't spit out. Sarah was looking at him now, really looking at him. I could see the gears turning in her head, the pieces clicking into place. "Derek, if this is just temporary like you said, why wouldn't you want them to sign it?" "It's the principle, Sarah. It's about trust, about family." "No," I said quietly, standing up from my chair. "It's about respect, about asking instead of assuming, about honoring someone's boundaries instead of steamrolling them because you think you know better." I walked over to the window, looked out at the trees, took a breath, then turned back to face them all. "Derek, when you first asked me about your parents staying here, I said no. I told you this was my space, my peace after losing the woman I spent 51 years with. But you didn't hear no. You heard, convince me harder. You put Sarah on the phone to guilt-trip me. You brought the kids up here to soften me up. You talked about me behind my back, called me selfish to my daughter, made me out to be the bad guy for wanting to protect the one thing I have left that's mine." Sarah's hand went to her mouth. She was shaking her head, but I could see the recognition in her eyes, the conversations she was remembering, the things Derek had said that she'd brushed off or made excuses for. "And then," I continued, my voice steady, "when I finally agreed, you showed up with a U-Haul full of furniture. Not suitcases for a temporary stay, furniture. A recliner, a TV, boxes and boxes of belongings. That's not temporary, Derek. That's moving in. That's establishing residency. That's making my home into their home without ever asking if I was okay with that." Patricia's face crumpled. "We didn't know. Derek said you offered, said you insisted." "I'm sure he did. Because I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at the man who'd manipulated everyone in this room, including his own parents, to get what he wanted." Ron stood up slowly, favoring his bad leg, walked over to me, extended his hand. Frank, I apologize. If we'd known the situation, we never would have agreed to this. We're not looking to impose. We'll sign your paperwork and we'll stick to it. 6 months, like it says. Then we'll find our own place." I shook his hand. Firm grip, honest eyes. "I appreciate that, Ron." Derek exploded. "Are you kidding me right now? Dad, he's manipulating you. Can't you see that? This whole thing is a setup to make me look bad." "No, son," Ron said quietly, turning to face Derek. "You made yourself look bad. This man lost his wife, built himself a sanctuary, and you tried to take it from him by using us, by using your family. That's not how we raised you." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma and Frankie had stopped playing, sensing the tension. Sarah was crying quietly, one hand covering her face. Derek was standing in the middle of the room looking like a cornered animal, realizing too late that the trap he'd tried to set had closed around him instead. I went to my office, came back with a pen, set it on the coffee table next to the documents. "Ron, Patricia, you're welcome to stay under the terms we've outlined. I'll help you get settled, make sure you have everything you need. But Derek, you need to leave." "What?" His voice cracked. "You heard me. You manipulated this situation from the start, lied to your parents, pressured your wife, disrespected my home and my boundaries. I don't want you here. Sarah and the kids are always welcome, but you need to go." Sarah stood up. "Dad, he's my husband." "I know, baby girl, and I love you. But I won't have someone in my home who treats me like an obstacle instead of a person, who uses family like chess pieces. Your mom taught me a lot of things, but one of the most important was knowing when to stand your ground. This is me standing." She looked at Derek, then at me, then back at Derek. I could see the war happening inside her, the loyalty to her husband fighting against the truth she couldn't ignore anymore. Finally, she wiped her eyes and said, "I need some air." She walked out onto the porch. The kids followed her, confused and scared. I wanted to go to them, but I knew Sarah needed space to process, to think without Derek in her ear. Derek pointed at me. His hand was shaking. "You think you're so smart. You think you've won something here, but all you've done is push your family away. Sarah's not going to forget this." "Maybe not, but at least she'll remember it honestly, without your version of events clouding the truth." He grabbed his keys off the counter, started toward the door, then stopped, turned back. "They're going to be a burden, my parents. You'll see, this isn't the victory you think it is." "Then I guess that says more about how you see your parents than it does about me." He left. The door slammed behind him so hard the windows rattled. Through the glass I could see him storming past Sarah on the porch, getting in his SUV, peeling out of the driveway like he was escaping a crime scene, which, in a way, I guess he was. Ron sank back onto the couch, put his head in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Frank. I'm so sorry. You've got nothing to apologize for. Neither of you do." Patricia was crying softly. "We've made such a mess. We should go. We should just go. You just got here. And from what I understand, you need a place. That offer stands. Sign the papers, follow the terms, and we'll figure this out together. No games, no manipulation. Just honest people trying to help each other out." They looked at each other, these two tired people who'd been caught in his son's scheme without even knowing it. Then Ron picked up the pen and signed his name. Patricia signed hers. I signed as the homeowner. It took less than 5 minutes to make official what should have been established with respect from the very beginning. Sarah came back inside about an hour later. The kids were with Jim next door, where I'd asked him to take them for a while. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. She looked at her in-laws, then at me, then back at me. I could see the war happening inside her, the loyalty to her husband, fighting against the truth she couldn't ignore anymore. Finally, she wiped her eyes and said, "I need to know. I swear, Dad, I didn't know he was doing all that." "I know, sweetheart. He told me you'd offered, that you'd called him and said you'd changed your mind, that you wanted the company. I thought I was doing the right thing by encouraging it."
I stood up, walked over to her, and pulled her into a hug. She collapsed against me, the way she used to when she was little, and the world felt too big. "You were trying to help everyone. That's who you are. That's who your mama raised you to be. But Derek took advantage of that, used your good heart to get what he wanted." "What do I do now?" she asked into my shoulder. "That's not for me to say, baby. That's between you and him. But whatever you decide, I'm here. Always." She pulled back, wiped her face, looked at Ron and Patricia. "I'm so sorry. Both of you. If I'd known what he was really doing—" "We know, dear. We know." The rest of that day was strange. Quiet, but not uncomfortable. We had sandwiches for lunch. I showed Ron and Patricia around the property, pointed out the trails through the woods, the creek where the grandkids like to fish. We moved some of their boxes, organized their room properly. They were easy people, grateful people, the kind of folks who said please and thank you and meant it. Sarah stayed for dinner. We grilled chicken on the deck while the sun set through the trees. Emma and Frankie came back from Jim's and seemed relieved that the tension had eased. We didn't talk about Derek, didn't need to. That was a conversation for another day. For now, we just were. Together. Family in the way it's supposed to be, not the way it had been weaponized. When Sarah left that evening, she hugged me again, longer this time. "I love you, Dad, and I'm sorry I didn't listen before." "Nothing to be sorry for. Love you too." I watched her taillights disappear down the driveway, stood there in the cooling air, listening to the crickets start their evening song. Felt something in my chest loosen, something that had been tight for a long time. The weeks that followed were different than I expected. Ron and Patricia settled in. They were quiet people, respectful. They drank their coffee on the porch in the mornings, helped with dishes without being asked, kept to themselves most of the time. Ron started helping me with projects around the property. We built a new storage shed together, worked in comfortable silence most days. Patricia taught me how to make Barbara's favorite pie from memory, claimed my wife had given her the recipe years ago at some family gathering I didn't remember. Sarah stayed to visit every weekend, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. Derek came once, tried to apologize in that way people do when they're not really sorry but want things to go back to normal. I listened, didn't accept it. Told him we'd take things one day at a time, and if he wanted to rebuild trust, he'd have to earn it. He didn't like that answer, but he nodded and left. I think Sarah was proud of me for that, for not just giving in to keep the peace. 4 months into the arrangement, Ron and Patricia found a small apartment closer to town. Nice place, ground floor, right near a medical center for Ron's appointments. They gave me proper notice, just like the contract said. Helped me clean out the guest room, pack up their things properly. The day they left, Patricia hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for seeing us as people, not as pawns. You're a good man, Frank." After they drove away, I walked through the house. It was mine again. Quiet again, but different somehow. The silence didn't feel as heavy. The memories of Barbara weren't as painful.
The space I'd fought so hard to protect didn't feel quite as empty as it had before all this started. I think that's what Derek never understood. This was never about refusing to help. It was about being asked, about being respected, about someone seeing my pain and my peace and honoring both, instead of exploiting them. When Ron and Patricia stayed here, it worked because it was honest, because the terms were clear, because everyone involved treated each other like human beings instead of obstacles or opportunities. Sarah and I rebuilt what Derek had damaged. It took time, lots of conversations, some tears, but we got there. She saw who he really was, and she made her choices. They're still together, but things are different now. She stands up to him, sets boundaries, doesn't let him use their family as leverage. I'm proud of her for that. Barbara would be too. As for me, I'm still in my house in the woods, still wake up to bird songs and pine trees and silence. But now the silence doesn't feel lonely. It feels earned, deserved, like something I fought for and won, not by being cruel or violent or cruel, but by being clear, by standing firm, by refusing to let someone else's agenda become my reality. Some nights, I sit on the porch with my whiskey and talk to Barbara like she's right there in the chair next to me. Tell her about my day, about the grandkids, about how I handled things. I think she'd have a lot to say about all this. Probably would have seen Derek coming from a mile away, like she always did with people. Probably would have told me to stand my ground sooner, not wait until I was pushed to the edge. But she'd also understand why I did it the way I did, why I let Derek think he'd won before I showed my hand, why I made sure everything was legal and documented and clear as day, because that's how you protect yourself when you're dealing with people who twist words and rewrite history. You make the truth undeniable. You put it in writing. You stand in your integrity and let their lack of it speak for itself. This house isn't just a house anymore. It's proof that you can lose everything and still build something beautiful. That grief doesn't have to be the end of your story. That sometimes the people who test you the most are the ones who teach you what you're really made of. I learned that peace isn't something you find. It's something you create, something you defend, something you refuse to compromise on even when people you love ask you to, especially then, because real love doesn't ask you to diminish yourself. It doesn't manipulate or guilt or pressure. It sees your boundaries and respects them. It honors your no as much as your yes. Derek wanted to take my peace, thought he could wear me down, move his pieces into place, and checkmate me before I even realized we were playing a game. But here's what he didn't count on. I wasn't playing. I was living. And when you're fighting for your life, your real life, you fight smart. You fight calm. You fight with truth on your side and paperwork in your pocket, and the kind of certainty that only comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you deserve. Some folks might say I was cold, that I should have just gone along with it, kept the peace, let Derek have his way to avoid family drama. But those folks don't understand what it's like to build something from grief, to take the shattered pieces of your life after losing your person and somehow construct a new existence, to fight for joy again after sorrow tried to bury you. This house, these woods, this silence, this peace, I didn't stumble into it. I built it, board by board,
nail by nail, day by day, and I'd be damned if I was going to let someone who saw my kindness as weakness take it from me. In the end, Derek didn't lose because I was smarter or meaner or more manipulative. He lost because he underestimated what a man will do when his back's against the wall and he's got nothing left to lose except the one thing he's built for himself. He thought age made me soft, thought grief made me vulnerable, thought being a grandfather meant I'd cave to keep everyone happy. He was wrong on all counts. Now I wake up every morning to quiet. Real quiet. The kind that comes from knowing your space is yours. Your choices are yours. Your life is yours. And nobody gets to take that unless you hand it to 'em. I didn't hand it over. I held on tight. And in so doing, I taught my daughter something I hope she never forgets. Sometimes, the most important word you can say is no. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is stand still while everyone around you demands you move. Sometimes,